guys.
A shit show, a pure shit show. It literally takes a village.
I don't know if it was dirty or clean.
Oh my god.
Bad mom.
Like
Gone
that
wild. Yes.
Because I'm shining.
Woo! That was good, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Mine's like extra strong today.
Is it? And here I could only handle water because if I had anything else, I'd just be like,
A hot mess.
Blah.
So excuse me if I'm a hot mess, because So let's start by sharing who we lost and how we found out.
Romy.
I think to be exact, maybe I think it's already been 8 or 9 years now. I lost one of my best friends. She was murdered by her, at the time, boyfriend. I found out it was when I was teaching. So I was actually, my heart's beating so bad. I was actually just pulling up to work. And for some reason I was sitting in the car. I think I was early or something, but I hadn't got out the car. And I received a phone call from one of our mutual friends. And she goes, "Oh, did you hear?" And I'm like, "Did I hear what? No." And then she was like, "Oh, Nisha is like, she passed away." And I'm like, "What? Like, no way." This is someone that we would talk every morning on our way to work. For years we did this. And I'm like, "What?" So immediately I thought, because she used to drive, like we always used to fuss at her for how fast she drove. Like she would drive so fast. So immediately I thought, oh my God, she was probably in an accident. And then they kind of explained what happened. And I just remember like just feeling almost like numb, kind of paralyzed in a sense, like I couldn't get out the car, even though I needed to get out the car, because I was, like I mentioned, I had just pulled up to work, which was the school, and my students were going to be coming in the class. And but I remember like just feeling very overwhelmed and crying on the phone. And I think at the time I had called, I think like the assistant or someone that was going to be working with me, and kind of told them what was going on. I remember, and everything was kind of a blur too, because I was still in disbelief and in shock. And I'm like, what? This can't be real. Like, when am I going to wake up? But I remember going inside and like going to another classroom where the kids were out to lunch or PE or something. They were out, they weren't in there, and crying. And a few of the staff was like trying to help me get it together. And they were like, "You don't have to be here. Like, you know, if you want to go home." But I didn't feel like I could drive at the time, because this is like one of the people I was closest to. Like, I've never had like a death with anyone that I was really, really close with. So this was like the first person that was really, really close with that to lose. So it was very overwhelming. But I remember them, you know, telling me that I didn't have to go inside and help the kids. And I remember just needing to gather a moment and feeling like, it's unexplainable though. Like I just, that feeling is almost like the worst day of your life in a sense. So I kind of gathered my thoughts, and I believe it took me a while before I can drive home, but I kind of drove home and just like sat in my misery in a sense, and just crying, trying to figure out what's going on. She had a son that was the same age as my oldest at the time. I think he had to be about 4 or 5. So yeah. So
did you feel like anger because when did you find out she was actually murdered, that it wasn't?
Well, they told me on the phone call, but of course it was just like speculations because they hadn't got him in yet. Like, because it had just happened. They were still like, questioning and trying to figure out what happened. But they were saying that it was a possibility that it was him. And I'm like, I'm like, what? Like, it just was like, how did this even happen? Like, what do you mean? So all the facts weren't there. So at the time, of course, I felt angry because when someone's, taken from you and you don't know why and you can't question God on, what his plan is. But I just remember feeling like, why, in a sense? And so I guess you can convert that into me being a little angry because I didn't understand what was going on and why.
That's awful. So for the person that I lost, it was my dad, and it was this year will be 2 years. And if you've heard me talk about him, like, he was a Marine. He was like the healthiest, strongest person. That I knew. He was the healthiest, strongest guy that I knew. And he ate clean and he worked out every day. And sorry. In June, I'm gonna sound like a man this whole episode.
Wow.
Okay. In June, he got like a really weird cough, and he had it tested, and he was going to the doctors and had all these lab works done, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And they thought they were about to tell him, like, we think it's asthma. Like, at the end, like, after all these months of them running tests, I don't know why they never ran it for cancer, but they thought it was going to be asthma. Like a bad case of asthma. Okay. But we noticed that every time we would see him, he started aging. Like, he went from looking like a, like a nice, handsome 60-year-old man to, very old and weathered and weak within a matter of months, because this happened in June. And in November, they found out that he had stage 4 stomach cancer, which I guess is one of the hardest ones to finally diagnose. And it's called gastrointestinal cancer. And he ended up dying the next month. So we had a 6-week, cancer journey that I thought was gonna last, like, what, years? People, like, I've known people who have had cancer for years, and I thought, he's a fighter, like, he's gonna fight it, So within the 6 weeks, my mom moved in to nurse him. My parents were married for 25 years, but they got divorced, and they had been divorced for 10 years, but they always remained really good friends. And he asked her to come and take care of him because it's like, as soon as, well, like, not even as soon as we found out, because like, even before we found out, I told you he was withering away, and he had fallen and he had hurt his back. So he thought that his back wasn't healing because he had pulled it or something. But it turns out that the whole time the cancer had already spread to his spine. So it made it difficult for him to walk. So he was immediately put on bed rest. So he never got to, check off anything from his, bucket list, or, those songs that they're like, live like you're dying, like, and all this other stuff. Like, no, it was just, he was in a lot of pain for the rest of the six weeks. And I don't know if it was the pain or we didn't know at the time that it was terminal. It took a good 4 weeks to find out that it was terminal cancer. So the whole time we're trying to be positive, we're trying to, you know, say you're gonna fight this, and you know, and if you've also listened to our previous episodes, you know that he was very strict on us and he disciplined us, and we had like a strained relationship. He was somebody who was kind of hard to love, you know, like you wanted to love him because he was your dad, but he was so rough around the edges, and so like he was a difficult person to communicate with and to love. But during that time, we got to see a different side of him. He started being really kind. He was really patient, even though he was in a lot of pain and uncomfortable. All he wanted was his kids around and his grandkids, and there's so many of us within our little immediate family. We have 25 people, and he was in so much pain he couldn't even walk, but he wanted everybody around all the time, you know. So and then we tried to be optimistic, but you know, he needed oxygen. It was going downhill very fast. So during that time, I felt like I need to tell him something. Like I need to show my love to him or express my gratitude to him, because I don't know when he's gonna go, you know? So, you know me, I'm weird and I'm corny. So I thought it would be nice to write him a eulogy, but read it to him, because I don't give a fuck. Who knows? You know, like, I just feel like it's sad that we read these eulogies at people's funerals, and a lot of the times they don't even know how we really felt about them, you know? So, especially in these cases when they were hard to love, you know? You don't get to tell them thank you for everything. So I knew I would regret if I never told him any of those things. So some of the things I wanted to tell him, that I told him, like, you know, I don't know what the future holds, because I didn't want to be a Debbie Downer. I didn't want to tell him, like, hey, Pop, you're dying, even though you're in bed. And it was clear to me. It was clear, but at the time we still didn't know it was terminal. So I wanted to...
So hopeful.
Yeah, so I just told him, like, hey, I don't know what the future holds, but I just want to make sure that you know that I love you. And I never understood your parenting style and why you had to discipline us so hard, you know? But now that I'm a parent, I understand that he was just trying to do better than what his parents did to him. Because his parents were a lot more extreme, you know? And I could see how everything he was trying to do was to prepare us for the future, to make us strong and responsible and self-sufficient. And he didn't know how to do it in love, you know? So when I read it to him, I basically was like this, like just a blubbering frog, like reading this to him. And he was closing his eyes because he was in so much pain. And I felt like I was bothering him with my emotions. Like, hey, you're dying and you're in pain, but let me just dump this on you, you know? And he was just like, oh, mija, like, thank you. He's like, that was good. You should read it at my funeral. Like, he joked about it. And
did you read it at his funeral?
I couldn't even talk now. This is almost 2 years ago. Like, I couldn't, but when we had like a 1-year reunion with our siblings, and I read it to them. But so at the end, he started having insomnia where he wouldn't sleep, and it was like days that he wouldn't sleep. And I don't know if it was a mix of the pain medication that he was on, or he was just his last days. But he started hallucinating, and he started seeing people in his room, and it was interesting because it wasn't people that he knew. It was just like random stuff in his room. Like, and I talked about it on our spooky stories episode, that he was just seeing random people working on pipes and, you know, pulling up cars in his room. And one night I took the night shift and I spent the night with him, and I was just like, Dad, what do you see? Like, just tripping out because he's like grabbing at the air, you know, and I just felt so guilty because I was the whole time just praying, like, please let him get through this, you know. But then seeing him like this, and he looked like he completely lost his mind, you know, and I was just like, okay, God, like, I get it. Like, if you have to take him, just take him. Like, take him in peace because he's losing it, you know. He's completely on bed rest. He's completely like, he's losing it. He's on an oxygen machine. Like, so, it took us 4 weeks to finally get told from the doctors that he had terminal cancer. It's a joke, guys. The process with cancer, man, it takes so long. And he had great insurance. He was a veteran, so he even had that insurance. Like, it just, the process takes so long to diagnose it, to find out what the treatment options are. By the time they told us, there's no treatment options because he's terminal, and we can't tell you how far along, but it could be any day, it could be months. So we're like, okay, thanks. But he held on for one last family gathering with all of his kids and grandkids, and that was a couple days before Christmas. We celebrated our own little Christmas gathering because he wasn't looking good. And the next morning he took his last breath in my mom's arms, and that was Christmas Eve. And she called me that morning, and we rushed over there, and thankfully we were, you know, still able to, he was still warm, and we played his favorite music, and I just held his hand, and I wanted to smell him, you know, for the last time. And we sent him off when he picked up his body with like a military salute. And honestly, like, it was awful and it was sad, but it was a beautiful moment. I mean, I couldn't have asked for like a better goodbye, you know, even though we weren't there to say goodbye. And I know he struggled at the end, you know, breathing and gasping for air, but and I wish he would have passed in his sleep. You know, you just want your family not to suffer. But yeah, that's my story. Let me go blow my nose.
Okay, so here I go. So I've mentioned in previous episodes that, oh my God, I'm already crying and I haven't even finished the sentence. I lost my dad and my sister and my mom. Oh my God. Okay. I lost my dad when I was 5. My little sister when I was 11. And my mom last year. Okay, I'm so sorry.
No, it's totally okay.
Don't be sorry.
And unfortunately, they all passed away suddenly. So we never got to say goodbye to any of them. My dad passed away from valley fever. And he had double pneumonia at the time. So I don't even know how to explain what valley fever is. It's like an infection in the lungs. So because of that, he got the double pneumonia. And I remember he was sick in bed. And he was just sick. Like, you know, you have the flu when you're laying in bed. And then all I remember are like the ambulance people coming into our hallway, and they had shut me and my brother into our rooms, and they took him on the stretcher. And we went to visit him at the hospital. And I want to say, like, they sent me home to go sleep because I was 5 at the time. They sent me home with an aunt. And the next day he had passed. And that was it for him. And my sister died from pneumonia. And I mentioned this in a previous episode where I had felt guilty for getting her sick. So she was sick at home with my mom, and she had cerebral palsy. So my mom was her caregiver, and you know, my mom was a nurse at the time too. So she didn't feel the need to take her to the hospital. Like, we just thought, you know, she was sick. My mom was just tending to her, you know. And I remember being outside watching, because I had uncles living with us at the time. I remember being outside and watching one of my uncles clean our van or wash our van, and all of a sudden I heard my mom scream. So we ran in, and she was holding my sister, screaming to breathe. And we rushed to the emergency room, and she was pronounced dead. So I didn't get to say bye to her then. And last year in August, my mom passed away from a collision with a train. So that was very sudden and unexpected. And I remember getting a phone call that evening that, you know, my brother had called, because my family all live up in Fresno, so it's like 4 hours away from where I'm at now. And I remember having dinner with my husband and my kids, and my brother had called and asked if I had heard from my mom that day. And, you know, I would talk to her every day. And I had said, no, I haven't heard from her today. And he started saying that they can't get a hold of her and something happened, or they think something happened. So all he knew was that the police were called to go to her house, and my brother doesn't live with her. He lives an hour away from her. And at the time, it was only my grandma that was home. So she couldn't really understand what the cops were there for. So she gave them my aunt's number, which is my mom's sister, and kind of just informed her like that they're looking for like my brother, basically, or that there's been an accident, or I really don't know exactly, but he was just like, the cops went, we can't get a hold of her, no one's answering, you know, she's not answering her phone, and neither is our stepdad. So I have a friend that works in the police department in the town they live in. And I called him right away and was like, hey, do you know why the cops were called to my mom's house? It's a small town, so they know, like, you know, he had to have known something. So he asked me what the address was, and I told him. And you could tell he kind of was hesitant, and he was like, I'll check the system. And at the time, my husband's sitting at the dinner table and looking at me, kind of like shaking his head and telling me, you know, when the cops are sent to their house, it's usually not good. So I start freaking out. And then my friend tells me, oh, something happened with a train. I don't know. And it's in the next town over. So you need to call the police station in that town. And now that I'm like thinking about it, I kind of think he knew, but didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. Yeah. So then he gives me the number, and I call them. And while this is all happening, my husband's on the phone with my brother and my sister-in-law, and I don't know. So I'm calling the police station, and they're like, unfortunately, I can't give you information. Like, I can only give information to your brother because he's older. He was like, I don't know why. I have no idea. But by that time, my brother had confirmed with my husband while they were on the phone that they collided with a train. And I just remember bawling and just crying, and my 5-year-old staring at me and crying because I'm crying. And I don't know, I just lost it. And that's how I found out. So this is a terrible episode. When did the grief set in, and how did you guys handle it? Roni, do you want to go first?
This is an episode. So I feel like we had to go. So her apartment needed to be like not cleaned out, but we needed to go through things in her apartment, and her mom couldn't do it, which is explainable. And her mom reached out to some of her closest friends to ask us if we could go, help with, her apartment. And at the time, I wanted to do anything I could, to help, because I didn't know what else I could do to, help. So I agreed to go over there. And to my surprise, getting there, I got this overwhelming feeling that it was too real for me being there, and she's not there, and like, what am I over here? Like, everything kicked in, and I went in her apartment, and then I just got this like eerie feeling, and I freaked out. I panicked. I still tried to help. I remember walking towards her room, and I saw her mattress, and it was like cut out, I guess, where they found her. That part was cut, and but you can see like still like blood on the mattress, and like splattered on the walls and stuff. And I couldn't do it. It got too real. I had to I remember having like almost like a small panic attack, and I was like, I feel so useless because I can't even like gather myself to help her mom, go through her stuff. But it became so real. And I feel like that's when it really hit me. It's yeah, I feel like that's when it really hit me.
So you kind of went into like a shock.
Mm-hmm. I kind of felt like, because you don't want to believe, when something happens like that, you're always hoping that like it's a dream, basically, like a bad dream. And to go over there and be in that situation made it real. Seeing like, stuff on her door and things taped up, it made it too real. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through any of her stuff. I couldn't even be in that house. And I feel like that's when it started, like when it really hit me that she's gone.
Can you tell us about the hard days with her gone?
It's sad because I feel like I struggled with this also, because I don't feel like I know things take time, I don't know how much time it takes because I'm still at a place where like I mentioned that me and her we were pregnant together. We had our kids around the same time. Like my oldest and her son are literally like 3 months apart. And I still have a hard time like seeing him or speaking with her mom, just because it brings back these memories, and I don't know if it's that I haven't fully accepted it or why I feel this way, but like every time I like look at him, he looks just like a splitting image of her, and I feel for her mom, so I try to almost avoid it in a sense so that I don't have to relive that pain all over again, which is kind of selfish in a way because I can't even imagine the pain that her actual mother is going through or her actual son, you know. But I still feel like I'm grieving her in a sense. There's not a day that goes by that she doesn't cross my mind, or I don't think of something that we did funny. Or a few weeks ago, I was cleaning out my garage and I found pictures of us, and then I just sat there and like found myself crying and thinking about all this stuff we did and how we thought our life was gonna go, and she was so young. So I feel like I'm still grieving. I feel like the grieving process is ongoing. I don't know when you ever stop grieving. If you stop, I don't think you've ever fully stopped.
Um, her ex-boyfriend that murdered her, did he go to jail for life, or what's the story on that?
So he's currently in jail. He went to trial about, I think his trial was finally maybe a few years after her death, maybe close to 2 years. And I remember I was pregnant with my second child at the time, and I remember my husband telling me because of the severity of the case, um, that he didn't think it was a good idea that I went to her trial because he's like, you're pregnant. I don't want you to be upset, and I just don't think it's a good idea. But me, myself, I knew that I wanted to be there for her and for her family. So I knew that was something that I wanted to do regardless of how pregnant I was. Um, so I did sit through her entire trial. I went every day that they had the trial. I went and sat through that. And it was very hard to sit through that because they show everything. They show pictures. They show everything. You hear the full-on story, and it was very difficult. But being able to be there for her mom, and I feel like I had to put my feelings on the back burner and be there in support of her mother. So, but yeah, he is currently in there for life, with no possible parole. So that was justice in a sense, but doesn't bring her back. So
Yeah.
What about you, Janelle?
Well, because we had that time with him and we did, visually he looked like he was dying, and I know that we wanted to remain hopeful, so I feel like I was trying to prepare and trying to like grieve while he was still alive so that I wouldn't hurt so bad while he was gone or when he left. But then at the same time, there were days where that's another thing, like there were days where my kids would cry with him and he would tell them like, don't cry, Pop, like I lived a full life, and they would, and then I'm like, okay, he has embraced that he's gonna pass, and then there were days at the very end where he's like, I'm gonna fight this. I'm gonna make it. Like, he didn't even want to talk about death. And we're like, you just like wanted to talk about it last week, and now. And so mentally we were flopping constantly, and so I think we always wanted to try to be hopeful and put on optimistic, approach. And then also we wanted to prepare ourselves for if he were to pass, because doctors are telling us one thing and then he's wanting to fight it. And then we believe in God and miracles. So we're just like, ooh, it was just such a roller coaster of emotions. And then when he did finally pass, like I said, we had like a really nice closing. And my brother Michael, he has special needs, right? So he lives at a facility, or he lives at a house, like a residential, that take care of people with special needs. And he wasn't there when my dad passed away, or when he got taken away from us. So we all wanted to rally up and go together to tell him, so that he had that support. And while we're getting everything ready and we're about to leave, my dad's sister comes with police officers to my dad's house, accusing us of trying to poison and kill my dad. And we were like, you were just here last night. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I had literally called her that morning to tell her that my dad had passed away and that if she wanted to come and see him. And she had said, thank you, Mija. Like, I appreciate you calling me. And that was it. She never had said anything negative. And she, like I said, she was there the night before praying over my dad. And then she left. So she saw all of us leaving and she saw everybody there. And so we were just totally baffled that like she would come with the cops, and we're all on high grieving time trying to grieve my dad, and she comes guns blazing, and we're like, oh fuck no, like, so that just flipped. So instead of us grieving and being sad, it flipped to like, now the adrenaline's going, you're not going to fuck with us. And, she wanted to come in his house and she's trying to charge in. And it just was a shit show. It turned into a nightmare. She was ordering an autopsy on his body. She was harassing the doctors to try to get that approved. She was harassing the morgue to try to get that approved. She caused so much family drama. We couldn't come together after that. Like, we finally, after some time, the cops finally told her, listen, he has all this paperwork from the doctors, like he was terminally ill, and he has like a is it called a DOA, or like death of something, where it says do not resuscitate, basically. And they told her there's nothing we can do, I'm sorry ma'am, and they sent her off, and they're like, you just need to leave them alone and let them grieve. And that just like ruined the grieving process. Because for the rest of the week, she was calling, she was texting, she was harassing. I was worried about my mom, even though like none of us were guilty, but I was just like, oh my God, it's gonna look bad. His ex-wife comes in and is taking care, and now we're all poisoning him. And like it just put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. It caused so much family drama, to the point that we didn't even want to have a funeral for him, because we were like, fuck everybody, we're just gonna have a small funeral with just his immediate family, like our siblings, basically. And that was it. And then some of the siblings agreed and some of them disagreed. So, and then that caused drama, so it was a shit show. And it was awful. It was awful because it totally took away from the point of him. Like we weren't even thinking about him and grieving him. It was like, how are we going to protect him? How are we going to protect his body at the mortuary from them cutting him up because they want a fucking autopsy? Like, how are we going to, and so it turned out that my dad was cremated on my birthday, and it's kind of weird, right, to think that happened, but there was a sense of peace. Like, they can't mess with him anymore. Like, he's finally resting, like, and like, and we can now just not worry about her. And then even though we were still worried about her, because we're like, is she gonna come up at the funeral? Is there gonna be drama at his funeral? So we ended up having a funeral for him. But I feel like the real grieving started when we came home from the funeral, because it was just our family. Like, we didn't have his crazy ass sister, and we were able to just grieve all together, you know. And it hasn't been easy, but it was nice to start, even though it was like a week late. What about you, Marianne?
Um, the hardest days for me, I feel like growing up, like without my dad, like when I felt like my mom and my brother would gang up against me, like, you know, they had each other and I didn't have him to help me, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or like my wedding day that he couldn't walk me down the aisle. And he died at such a young age. He was 36.
Oh my gosh, that is young.
So I'm about to be 35. And as I approach the age, you know, that he had passed away, it like makes me realize like how young he was. And he had 3 kids. You know, my sister was a newborn when it happened. And like how much more life he had to live, you know? And then with my mom, I feel like this whole past year has been like hard. Especially when the kids hit their milestones. Like, she's not there to witness like her grandson's doing anything, for Landon starting elementary school, or she had passed right before Levi started walking. So just things like that are really hard for me. And I think because I was exposed to death at such an early age, like I grieved immediately for my mom because I knew what to expect, like feeling wise, you know, like not having her around anymore because, you know, my dad and my sister had passed. So I knew like that I was going to have those same feelings with her. And I feel like truly, like when we were planning her funeral and stuff, I remember because I was so close to my mom, like especially once I became a mom myself. Oh, I called her for everything. So she was basically one of my best friends at that point. And I remember getting ready for her funeral, and in our family, like the Filipino tradition, like me as her daughter, I'm supposed to wear a veil, like a black veil. And I remember like not knowing how to wear it or how to, you know, wash it, or and that was something that I would have to call her for, and I couldn't call her. So I think like that day, it truly, truly hit me. And, you know, the deaths that I've dealt with in my life were so like unexpected. And I've seen people lose their lives to cancer. Like my husband lost his mom to cancer, and I was there for it all. So it's like I remember comparing it to like their lives that, you know, I didn't have that time to say goodbye to any of them. And like I would contemplate like, is this how I wanted them to go, or would I rather have had them had cancer and I could have had more time with them to say what I wanted to say. And I don't know, I pray a lot, and I know like we try not to talk about religion a lot on our podcast, but that's been my saving grace, is praying. And I think like the first couple months after my mom had passed, it almost felt like I was trying to convince myself, or like I just felt like she was on vacation. And you know, because sometimes she would travel to the Philippines and be gone for like a month or two and then come back. Like to me, sometimes in my mind I thought like she's on vacation. You know, we don't usually hear from her too much, like when she's traveling. So we'll eventually hear from her when she gets back. And I think the first couple of months I had those feelings. And even now, like, it's weird because of like the whole COVID and the whole quarantine, like we couldn't go anywhere. And I was always going up north like every month to go visit my family. So I saw them often. And because of quarantine, like we couldn't really see anyone. So I think that too played a part in like it not feeling real, because I'm like, oh, well, we can't see anyone. So that's partly why I don't see her. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just like I couldn't even go visit her graveside because of quarantine. And I don't know. It's like grief is messy and hard and a roller coaster, and it's not the same for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some days hurt more than others, but I don't know. I mean, talking about it and thinking back on it, like I definitely can see that I went through like all the stages of grief. You know how like they say there's like, I don't know, anger, denial, and whatever the other ones are. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, I've gone through them and I'm still partly, I mean, not partly, but I'm definitely still grieving. I mean, it's only been a year. So, yeah.
Yeah,
You're gonna
it's still
grieve.
pretty fresh.
Were you guys able to take care of your home and kids while you were grieving?
For me, since I found out while I was going to work, like I mentioned, obviously, I wasn't able to take care of those kids in the class. And coming home and being there while this all was going on, that's why I always say it takes a village, because my mom and my grandma were able and it was just Devin at the time, um, to help me out with him, because I just, I was feeling like just no energy and just like not in the mood kind of a deal. Like I just was still trying to figure out everything in my head on why, how, what for. And so I didn't kind of want to be bothered. And I knew I still had to be a parent. But like I mentioned, my mom and grandma were very helpful with that and keeping him for me and just kind of letting me have that space to grieve, and just get my thought process together without having to do this or do that for a child. Um, so I would say, obviously, it impaired since I had to have help. But I feel like I didn't, and maybe this is like something that people need to do more of, is letting your kids see that side of you and that it's okay to grieve and have emotion. But he was so little at the time, that I kind of didn't want him to see me that way. So I used them to my advantage in helping me with that. But I think back now, maybe I should have involved him. It could have maybe helped me help the grieving process a little faster, because I see people who um, lose people very close to them. And sometimes those other people, your kids and everything, help you get through the process a lot faster. So I wonder, if including him would have helped me get it together. But then again, I don't feel like you ever really get over it. So when does the grieving process ever stop? And especially since people grieve differently. I know people who've lost people 20 years ago and they're still emotional over it. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things.
For us, it was right at Christmas time, so 2 days later was Christmas Day, and I felt like I didn't want to ruin it. And they were old enough to understand, like my son, he was 9, I think, 9 or 10. No, he was 10, and my other son was 6. And they had a relationship with him, and it's interesting because I feel like an asshole because I used to bitch at my dad for not being around as much as I wanted him to be around, because I wanted him at every birthday party. I wanted him at every barbecue. I wanted him to be there, and there were things that he would miss because he didn't want to go. Or I know at the end it kind of got awkward because with the divorce and stuff, but there was, I don't know, but he just chose not to go to certain things, and it would drive me crazy. And so I would nag at him for it. And now I feel ungrateful because at least he was there, because apparently, the times that he was there, my kids formed a relationship with him, and it hit them harder than I expected to happen. My dad used to come over and play basketball with them randomly. He would come. Well, he would really come for dinner, unannounced, and then he would stay and play basketball with them and watch their funny TV shows. And then I think because the boys watched him slowly, change before their eyes, from him being able to be outside playing basketball to them, to him not being able to stand up and turning into like bones, so it was really, really hard. And I think it hit them too. So because it was hitting them, I wanted to try to save face and be okay, but after his funeral, which happened after the new year, I took months away from everything, like social media, texting. Like I just wanted to just be, like Marianne said, I just wanted to feel all the grief so that I could not get it over with, but I just wanted to be in that moment, and just experience it. I didn't want to push it away for later. Like I wanted, like, okay, here, give it to me now, and it was tough because every time that I would think I'd be okay, or it wouldn't be that hard of a day, I should say, one of the kids, I'd find them crying in the bedroom with a picture of him, because they wanted to tape his pictures on their dresser. So they'd be crying. And then it's like, how do you, so it just would like break us all down all over again. And between the both of them, we were just a hot mess all the time. So part of me wishes that they were younger so that they didn't have that emotion and that hurt and pain. But then at the same time, I'm grateful that they'll have some kind of memories of him, compared to my daughter who's 3. She doesn't know, like she has no idea. And we try to point to his picture and say, oh, Papa. But one day she's going to forget, because she's a toddler. Her mind is just going to, she was 1 when she last saw him. So yeah, that's my story.
For me, thankfully my husband helped a lot. But unfortunately it wasn't like an option to, I didn't have any other option than to take care of the house and the kids, because eventually my husband had to go back to work, and all my family's 4 hours away. And so I had to kind of just not go back to our daily routines, but I had to do what I needed to do to make sure the house was, kept and the kids were fed. And at that time, Levi was still breastfeeding. So, I have someone just latched on to me all day long.
Do you feel like that helped? That was what I was saying when I said, like, sometimes you're not given that option. So do you feel like your children were like kind of your motivation to, like, this is your mother, of course, but your children were there to kind of give you that strength a little bit, to like keep you moving and forward and not just, sitting on your bed because you knew you had to like get moving for them?
And because they're so young, it was like a huge distraction, I want to say. Like, not that I didn't have time to grieve, because I did, thankfully. Like, when I did, my husband was home, or, you know, like, sometimes I would just cry in front of the kids, and Landon would ask me, why are you crying? And I would just say, I miss grandma, or, and I think because I included him in the grieving process, he started to understand, like, okay, it's okay to be sad. Or I mean, I don't know, like, with him, because he's so young. I mean, I lost my dad at 5 and he's 5, so I can only
Yeah.
imagine that the wheels are turning in his head and trying to figure out, you know. But yeah, they definitely were a huge motivation to just continue to go about each day, even if I was truly hurting inside. But yeah, how did it affect your kids, Romy? Like, for you, since you mentioned that.
Well, it was just Devin at the time, and he was too young to like truly understand, so I don't think that it had much effect on him. If anything, it was just me taking that time to grieve alone, would probably affect him because I wasn't, you know, directly active with him at that time. But he was too little to understand anything.
So you never had to explain
That.
the death
Later,
to him,
no,
or
later as he like got older, um, I would explain to him, but
Mhm.
at that time, he was too young to get it.
How did you explain it to him?
Um, and
Yeah,
I
because
feel like
that's a tough one, 'cause especially the situation. She was murdered by a boyfriend. Like
well,
that's
I feel like I didn't tell him the like details
was
of it
like,
until he was a little older,
hmm
because we had like it was her birthday or something. I ran into a picture or something, and then I just explained to him what happened about her boyfriend. He was just kind of like in shock, but like I said, that didn't come till later, so I didn't even try to explain it anytime before then because I feel like it was so much for me to understand,
yeah.
so he definitely wouldn't get it.
It was hard for us or for me to figure out how to explain death to my sons because I didn't really know how to explain it to myself. Like, I think it because my dad was not a religious man, and I knew it growing up. He never, he always spoke awful about religion and God and stuff like that. I wouldn't say he was an atheist, but I, I the closest thing to it. And so it was really like I was afraid for his soul. Like I was just like, what's gonna happen to you? You got it, like I don't know. And so I would panic, and my mom's like, just you need to pray for him. So I didn't have all the answers, but I just told the boys that he'll always be with them in their heart, you know. But it's like you don't know, you don't, especially that situation. Like I've had people pass that, you know, full-heartedly believed in God and stuff, and I felt like, man, they're gonna be okay, or that's at least what read in the Bible, that they're gonna be okay. But when they don't, you're like, okay, so what? Like, are you doomed? So, um, that was kind of hard. About you, Marianne?
Um, because Lennon was at an age where he was very curious about it and still young and innocent, and they don't they're especially if they've never been exposed to it before, it's very hard to explain that, especially because they were so close.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've said it before, but him and my mom share a birthday. So and that's her first grandson or her first grandchild. So, she adored the boys. Those were her only grandchildren. And she was really, really close with Landon. And so for me to have to explain it to him was very difficult, especially during the time of like us trying to figure out her funeral arrangements, or even, because she wasn't the only one in the car. My stepdad was in the car. Unfortunately, he only, he survived and had some, bruises and broken ribs. And so even while we were trying to do all that with, planning her funeral and figuring out what the next step was, we had to go visit him and, take care of his stuff because he had no family. Like, she was the only one he had here. And so, I don't know if I've said this before, but I've never really had a close relationship with him, and neither has my brother. We respected him for my mom, but, not that it was the last thing we wanted to do at the time, but we were in and out of the hospital trying to like take care of things for him, and he didn't know she passed. So having to break the news to him. And so Landon was there for it all. Like, I had to bring him along with me for the whole thing. So he would ask like 1,000,001 questions. And I remember not knowing how to explain it to someone that's so young and for them to understand. And thankfully, my sister-in-law was a kindergarten teacher at the time, so she knew how to like talk to him. And at the time, he was going to a Lutheran preschool, so they talked about God a lot at school. And it wasn't like a sad thing for him. Like, thankfully, the school knew what was going on and they helped him kind of understand.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because he knew my mom was really religious, like he would see her praying every night, like the nights that we would sleep at her house or she would spend the night here. And we always just like talked about God, So I think what helped too the most was we bought him like a bunch of books. And like the year before, my brother's dog had passed away, so we had bought like a dog heaven book. And so that made me think like, and that's how we had to explain, my brother's dog's passing to him. So I remembered that and was thinking, okay, let's, that helped for him to understand what happened to Manny, which was my brother's dog. So I was like looking up books for like people passing. And, Landon's a dinosaur lover. So I found a book about, I think it's called like When Dinosaurs Die. And it's supposed to be about like teaching them about death kind of thing. And it's almost too detailed. Like there's parts where we have to skip through because it's like people die because, I don't know, like, I mean, maybe Roni would use this in her scenario, like someone got murdered or, you know what I mean? Like, so those were little parts we'd skip over, but like, it would talk about how families grieve and what happens to them. And
We're like, we don't need more questions right now.
and
Let's
there
just
was,
focus.
what else? God Gave Us Heaven, and I think the memory box, I want to say. And even till this day, sometimes he'll choose like those books to read for bedtime. And I'm like, oh, like my husband hates reading them to him. But I'll read it because I know he picked it for a reason.
Such a sensitive topic.
Yeah. And it put my husband's like uncomfortable when it comes to things like that. And I think like a huge thing too was we put up a ton of pictures of her, especially with the boys. Um, and like if you walk through our house, there's pictures of her with them in every single room. So it's kind of helps them, I don't know,
Keep her memory
yeah,
alive.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how I explained it.
You mentioned that you put pictures up with your mom and the boys. Um, would that be one of the ways on how you get through the hard times? Does that help with things or?
Yeah, and again, like my faith, and I think because I have a strong hold on my faith, there's it there was comfort in knowing, well, this is for me at least, there was comfort in knowing that them three were all together again. You know what I mean? Like my mom hadn't seen my dad and my sister in such a long time, and they were finally reunited. So that was comforting for me at least. Um, and again, like the kids were a huge distraction, and I don't know. I mean, it's so fresh with me, so it's like I'm still grieving, but I mean, it doesn't get easier. You just learn how to continue living without them there. But there definitely isn't a day that, we don't think about her or them. Um, like we include her in our daily routines. Like Landon prays for her every night. And it's crazy when we hear him pray because he's so innocent and when he's praying, and but it cuts deep. Um, like we light a candle for her every day. I have the kids, tell her good morning and light her candle, or just having them not like act like she's there, but knowing that she was an important part of our lives and trying to help them remember that is something we do. And you just have to learn how to remember them through memories as years pass, because I feel like with my dad, because I was so young, I felt like as the years went on, it got harder and harder to remember him. Mm-hmm. And like some of the memories were foggy because a lot happens in between 5 and 30, and the only things we have are like our memories. And once those get foggy, you have photos. And I remember like we didn't have a lot of photos up at my mom's house growing up. Like she had photos, but not like a lot. They were all in albums tucked away. So it's not something we saw every day, So I think because I have them out here in every room, it's like a constant reminder to like that, I don't know, that it helps me at least to keep going. And I don't know. I did get mom guilt, but I took time for myself to grieve and didn't feel guilty for it. But there were times where I did feel guilty, but I knew it was something that was necessary in order to heal, I guess. And I felt guilty for enjoying some of the good days. Like, like I said, Landon and her share a birthday. So it's hard to enjoy his birthday, even though she's not there. Like the last 5 years, we always had parties for them together, or she was always with us on his birthday. So like enjoying him blowing out his cake, I felt guilty because she wasn't there. I mean, we had a cake for her, but it just wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like the holidays, like she was huge on holidays. So it's just, I think it's normal. Well, I'm sure it is normal to feel guilty for enjoying certain days without them. But yeah, I mean, I definitely felt guilt for certain things, but I didn't feel too guilty for taking time for myself to grieve. And thankfully, my husband helped a lot with the kids when I had to.
That's good.
That's very good. For getting through the hard times, for me, I just try to reflect on like the good days that I had with her when she was here. Like I mentioned, for a long time, we used to work together back in the day. Me and all my trades of skills when I was nursing. Um, we worked at this job together, and we end up going to different houses because we would work at a house for special need kids, and we would work at the different houses. But I remember every day we would talk on the phone on our way to work, and then talk about like what we were going to do for that weekend, or what the house was going to be like when we got there, if the kids were going to be crazy and different things like that. So I find myself just thinking about like all the good things about our relationship that we had. Even though I feel like I avoid seeing her mom and her son, I still am in connection with them. I still try to reach out to her mom on, those dates where like her passing, and her birthday is actually coming up like in a week or so. So I always make sure to reach out to her mom. But I don't think it doesn't ever get easier though. It's been about 8 or 9 years, and I still like, it's still not easier. It's still, I think about her often. I still try to make sense of it. I still just am constantly reminded by something of her, whether it be a song or like a scent that she loved. So I don't think it ever gets easier. I just think that you learn to live with it, but never easier. And then I just, try to stay active and live each day like it truly is my last, because she was so young. She left a son behind that is so young, like he's just the thought of him growing up without a mom, at that young age and being a boy. I just pray that, while she was here, I'm 100% sure she left a positive image and bond that he has about his mom in his heart. And he's such a good kid. So I know that it worked. But I feel like, oh, sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
You're doing a lot better than I am.
Don't be sorry, Roni.
I don't feel like I got mom guilt, because I feel like I needed that time to just grieve. And I feel like if I had involved Devin in my grieving process, I don't feel like it would have went the way that I wanted it to go. Like I feel like I needed to not be apologetic for letting out, my anger, frustration, all the different emotions I felt at that time, because it was like a whirlwind of a roller coaster. One minute I was laughing at something that I remember her saying, or I remember we wanted to go out one night to a club, and her mom was like, she cannot go into her room is clean. And I remember like us stuffing everything in her closet so she can go. Like it was like 1 minute I was like laughing about that, and then the next minute I'm crying about like she's not here, so I didn't feel guilty, because I felt like I needed to sit in that moment and go through those emotions. But the little part of me the guilt comes in is when I'm like living life and doing things with my family and I'm so young, and that's what she wanted. She was a very family oriented person. Things didn't work out with her son's dad, but she was still a hopeless romantic. She wanted to still get married, and she knew her path on her career. She was an awesome mom, and I feel guilty for that because it was taken away from her so young, and she didn't get to experience any of the other things that she could have experienced. So that's where the guilt gets me at times. But you can't question God and what He has in store for your life. So I just I just keep her near and dear with me every day in my heart. So
for me, I wasn't sure that I wanted it to get easier because I was afraid that it meant that I had to stop caring or I had to let him go, you know? And I didn't want to accept the new normal. It was just so weird. I wanted to get to a point that I could think about him without crying, or I could speak about him without crying, you know? And it took a while to get there. But I honestly, the only thing I could compare grief to is like the definition of bipolar, because one minute you're completely fine and the next minute it's like your world is crumbling and you're crying and uncontrollably, and then the next minute you're fine. Like it's just a wave of emotions, you know. And you just don't understand it, and you never know when it's going to hit. Like literally there's been times where we're at a restaurant with my husband's family and one of my dad's songs come on, or you know, and then I'm just eating and I'm just trying to cry in the corner quietly without making a scene, because that's the worst too. Like you don't want to make a scene, you don't want everybody to come and are you okay, and then it just kind of makes it worse, you know. So you just want to like hide your tears, but eventually you do have less crying days and they're kind of more spaced out. And if you want to call that easier, I guess that is, but it still hurts, you know. And as far as me staying present while grieving with my family, we at my dad's funeral, or we had like a celebration of his life, and we all took a shot for him, like a shot of Cazadores tequila, because that was his favorite, and he would have wanted that. He would have wanted that. But then after that, like I took a break from drinking because I really wanted to be in the moment and absorb the grief. I didn't want to suppress it. I didn't want to become more numb because I already felt numb. Like it's so weird. You feel overwhelming sadness, but then you feel numbness to everything that once mattered to you before, you know. Like nothing mattered. Like my business didn't matter, friends didn't matter, you know. Like I didn't want to invite anybody to his funeral, like any of my friends. Like nothing mattered but being in those moments, and I didn't want to numb it. And then I didn't want to drink to enhance it, the hurt. I already felt enough pain. I didn't want to go down that route. So I chose to not drink. I chose to like change my notifications on my phone so I wasn't getting like notifications on social media or text messages. I got off social media completely because it was so hard for me to see the world go on like nothing, you know, because here my world felt like it was crumbling, and everyone's celebrating New Year's, or you know, and celebrating life, and that's okay, but it just hurt too much,
at
you know.
that moment.
And I even tried, like it's weird because at one point I wanted to be around my family to have the support and so we could grieve together, and then at some point I'm like, no, I can't grieve anymore. Like, I want to go to a friend's house. So we went to Roni's New Year's Eve gathering. And I thought this will be good to like just get my mind out of this, you know. And while I'm there, I'm just thinking about my dad, you know, and like I just thought I just want to be home crying. Like, I don't want to be like I felt awful. And so then I left, and then I just went home to my mom's, and we just cried in the new year, you know, like it's just such a weird, you don't know what you want. And I tried to find healthier outlets. So I tried to do more exercising or declutter my home or keep busy in a different way that benefited my family, because I felt like for those 6 weeks, everything went to crap, you know, like all of our routines, all of our systems, all of our clean eating or whatever, like everything was focused on my dad, that we just dropped the ball on every like housework and stuff like that. So I was just trying to be productive around my house, organizing my little bits of the life that we had to try to pick up some pieces. But I didn't feel guilty for like having mom. I didn't have mom guilt because I felt like we were all grieving together. So, which I felt like they understood, you know, that we all needed time to like just be sad. And then I do really feel guilty for enjoying the days without him, because even though we had a complicated relationship, and it wasn't always peachy, there was still a lot of hurt, and I try to not, like, it's funny because I try to parent differently from him. I've always been like, okay, I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm going to parent differently. But then when he died, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm just trying to find the positives that I could pull from it, you know? And so instead of like using him as like, okay, I can't be like him, now I'm like, okay, well, what were the positive parts about him that I could pull from, like, strength from? And I feel like an asshole because there's a lot. He was responsible. He was a great provider. He showed us love in different ways, you know, and I feel like he did try. It was complicated, but I feel bad because there's nothing that I can do to fix the past of our relationship, you know. All I could do is try to stop the cycle from repeating with my children and try to pull the positives, but don't bash the negatives, because I don't want to be that person that's just constantly talking about the negatives, you know, about him. And then I feel awful because my dad always talked about retiring and traveling in his RV, and he had to retire on his deathbed so that it would like finally, like, he literally signed his retirement papers while he was in bed. And that was it. He never got to, you know, travel with his RV and live that dream. And it's nice because we all get to use his RV, but it's all him. And it's just, I feel guilty because I'm like, this is his dream, you know, like, so that's hard. And then my husband's like, well, at least you guys are using it. And, you know, he would want somebody to use it rather than just, but it's really bittersweet, you know? Okay, but now that we talked about the hard times, what is life like now? You know, did this horrible situation give you a different perspective on life?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I mean, on the surface, I may look like I'm coping well. I mean, I've had a handful of people tell me that I'm, you know, I don't cry or that I'm like brave and strong. But honestly, it's like deep down a daily struggle I deal with. I mean, maybe I just hide it well. But
Yeah.
I do. did give me a different perspective on life, because everything I look at now differently, especially people in situations like arguments are not worth it if it's over something petty, and holding grudges or drama is not necessary to me anymore. Like, I mean, it's not ever necessary, but I think because life was taken away from my dad and my sister and my mom so quickly, like, you never know when someone's gonna go. And especially like between my husband and I, like, my husband's in law enforcement, so I never know when will be his last, he can go to work and not come home that night. So like my perspective on life has changed, because every single person that I've lost could have gone, and I could have been mad at them and not have fixed it, in time. So for me, it's like I look at things like that differently. And even though my dad and my sister passed away, the passing of my mom hit differently for me, especially now that I'm a mom myself and I'm older and have a different perspective on life. It just makes you think differently and appreciate the little things more, especially with the kids. Like, every time I'm like snappy with Landon, like, I always have like a picture in my head of my mom like giving me this look, like, don't do that to him, like, just, you know what I mean? Like, she always, like, when she would see me get mad at him, she always kind of like checked me on it. So now it's like every time I get mad at him, I have that in my mind, like her trying to check me. And I don't know, life is definitely a lot different. Like, every time we see dragonflies, it reminds me of her. So for example, like, we just went on like a camping trip to the beach, and that was something she always had requested. Like, she would go camping with us, and it would always be to the desert or, somewhere like not appealing to her. Like, she always loved the beach. Like, the beach was her like thing, and she would always ask us like, let's go camping at the beach, and we never got the chance to before she passed. So we finally did a beach trip this last month, and we enjoyed our time there. Like, and in the back of my mind, I always like, every day we were there, I thought like, oh, she wanted this, she wanted to be here. But because the kids were having such a good time, like, we enjoyed ourselves. And right before we left, as we were leaving the parking lot, there was a dragonfly that just flew across, and Landon said, "Mom, look, Grandma was here the whole time. We were having so much fun. We didn't notice her." And I completely lost it. So things like that, like, I still lose it, but like, we look at things like that differently. And I hate to say it, and I think I've mentioned this to Janelle, like, I don't want to say I'm not afraid of death anymore, but it's, I don't know, like, because my dad, my sister, and my mom are all in one place, like, it's almost like I look forward to the day, like, we'll be reunited again. So it's like, I don't know, it's so sad to say, but I would not be afraid to die if it were my last day, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, our house where we live, there's train tracks right behind us. So the train is like a daily reminder for me. And I just get like a gut-wrenching feeling every single day.
Oh my God, Marianne.
So, and it sucks because the boys love trains, and that's how she used to come visit us, was on a train. So I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize at all. I didn't even realize that we are right by a train because Marianne's not too far from me. Yeah.
Sorry. When I think about the holidays and trying to survive them without my mom, I feel like the holidays are not the same without her. I mean, they're not. She was the oldest of 10 kids, so all of her siblings kind of depended on her. So she was the one who brought them all here from the Philippines. So in a sense, she was like the glue to our family. And Christmas time was always like her favorite. She made a huge deal about it. Like she would have all her little traditions and her little what do you call it? Like when like what is that called? Not traditions, but like she would like hang things or wear certain things because she believed like it was yeah, her little superstitions. And like I think the anticipation of the holidays for me are much harder than the actual holidays themselves. Like for me, thinking that Thanksgiving and Christmas are coming up is what makes me more anxious about it, because I'm like, okay, she's not there. Like I think about it more versus like the actual day. Like it's more about the kids. So I kind of, not that I forget about her during that day, but the kids distract me, and it's like we're trying to make it for like enjoyable for them. So I think for me, it's the anticipation of the holidays that are harder versus the actual days themselves. And I don't know.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself during those hard days, what would you say to help yourself through it? I know that you're currently going through it, but like, you know, those dark ass days where you don't want to get out of bed.
Honestly, there are like really no words that you could say to someone who just lost someone other than that you are there for them and that you're praying for them. I mean, depending on their religion, but like it was hard for me. I remember, especially right when it happened, like it was hard for me to hear people tell me, oh, she's in a better place. Because at the time I'm like going through like a shitload of emotions, and when I would hear something like that, I'd be like, what do you mean? Like she still had a lot of life to live here, or like she still had all this time with her grandkids. Like things like that made me built up more emotions that were more negative at the time. So like I mean, I've been guilty of saying it to people too, but I just, now that I'm in the grieving process, like it's more so that you should just let them know you're there for them. Like don't try to say anything to ease their pain or take away, you know what I mean? Like,
or rationalize it.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they just need an ear, or they need, you know, someone there just to listen and comfort them. Like even if you're not saying anything and just hugging them, that's more effective than trying to say something that will make them ponder, or you know what I mean? And I like, most importantly, like if I could go back and tell myself something, I would just acknowledge the mark she left on this world, and the mark she left on like my brother and I, and on her family and friends and the grandkids. Like I never really knew a lot of the things that she did beyond being a mother until after she passed. Like when we went through all her belongings, or even at the funeral, like random people came up to the podium and spoke so highly about her and how she influenced their lives. And I'm like, what? I've never heard that before. Or like, I just never knew that. And there were paperwork of things she donated to, like in the Philippines. She like built a church. Like I had no idea. So I think just instead of living with regret and questioning like what you could have done differently with them, or how you could have changed the situation, I think it's more important just to acknowledge like the goodness and, you know, what she had to offer, or what they had to offer to the world, and what they left behind, you know, that something could be carried on between each generation, or, you know, between friends and family. And I don't know. That's it for me.
So this situation did give me a different perspective on life. It taught me that life is so fragile and you should never take it or anyone for granted, because nobody knows your time here. And I never want someone to leave here and I feel like, you know, I didn't do enough, or I didn't say enough, or did they know how I really felt, or those things. So it just taught me to be more mindful of my actions in day-to-day life, because literally you can be gone in the blink of an eye, or someone you love. So I really carry that with me and choose my battles, basically. And the holidays, so her birthday was always like Thanksgiving weekend. So as we're approaching Thanksgiving, we always used to try to find things that we could do while she was here. But it would always be so difficult because it would be around Thanksgiving, and we're like, no, what, people are with their family on Thanksgiving and everything. So I always think about her around these holidays, and I make sure that I contact her mom and extend the invite. If we're going to be home or something, I always offer them to come over and just be in a family setting. So those holidays do get hard, especially Thanksgiving. If I can go back in time and talk to myself on these hard days, I would tell myself to reflect on all of our good times that we had, reflect on the memories that we had, and know that she knows how much I valued our friendship, and how loyal we were to one another. So let that be the memories that you keep, and not reflect on her so much of not being here anymore. Mm-hmm. Just reflect on the good times that when she was here, that at least she went knowing where we stood in our friendship and how we were. That's what I would tell myself. Just reflect on the good, and that will help you get through it.
Even though sometimes it's painful. Honestly, like painful. There was a time where I couldn't even look at pictures because I didn't want to. It was so painful, you know, like to cry and to go through all that and to think about the good times. I would try to kind of not and avoid thinking about it because I was done. I felt like I had cried all I could cry, you know, and then every time a picture or something, I would just kind of find myself trying to avoid it and there was
Yeah.
a small little window of time, but I don't know if that was the guilt of the relationship that we had before or what it was, and not wanting to like
I feel like it's
be
the
in the moment.
grieving. I feel like it's the grieving process because you're going up and down. And as sad as this is, I'm still grieving because I feel so horrible and guilty. But I still can't take myself to go to her gravesite. And it's been a while and I still can't go to her gravesite. I still feel horrible about at her funeral. And I still take this with me, and I shouldn't, but I do. But at her funeral, everyone's getting up there and saying things about her. And I feel like the whole room was like looking at me like, is Roni gonna go
Waiting
up
for
there?
you.
Is Roni gonna go up there? And I couldn't. Like I was holding on to my mom so tight, and she's like, if you want me to go with you, I'll go. She's like, just say the word. And everyone's like looking back, like, I know Roni's gonna go. If anybody, no one else go, I know. And I could not go. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't breathe. So I couldn't stand up. And I still to this day feel like almost like I failed her and her family in a sense because maybe they were expecting me to get up there. But I just couldn't do it. Like as much as I wanted to, I couldn't. So I always beat myself up about that. And I wish that I could have had the strength to go up there and share that with people, how awesome she was to me. But I couldn't at the time.
Yeah, that's tough.
Mm.
Don't beat yourself up about it, but I understand you feeling that way. So the way that I see life now is, my dad planned so much for the future and retirement and stuff. And I just feel like, yeah, plan for the future, but also live a good life now, because you don't know if you're going to be able to retire. Like there's times that my husband's like, oh, when we retire, I'm like, no, we're going to do it now. And yes, we can put our money away also for retirement, but we're not promised, we're not promised that we have tomorrow. So, and I think that you see that. And then the importance, I also learned the importance of nurturing your relationships while you can, because it's awkward on your deathbed if you don't have a good relationship with somebody. That conversation, the fact that we felt uncomfortable to express our love for him because we didn't have that like open communication. It was really sad, because if it was my mom, I tell her all the time that I love her, and I feel very open to communicate my love and pour it out for her. And I know there's no doubt in my mind that if she was on her deathbed, I would have said it a million times, because that's how open we were to each other. And it makes me sad that it was kind of like, should I say it now? This is weird. It doesn't feel natural, but I gotta say it, so just having that communication with my kids is very important to me. So that's what I learned for that. And then and to also have no regrets. Say what you need to say now, even if it feels weird or awkward, because you may not have another chance. And as far as holidays and stuff, this is going to be our second Christmas without him. And, my family is kind of at odds. Things kind of went to hell after he passed away. So it's sad because honestly, like, I feel like we want to celebrate his year anniversary, and I don't know. You just never know if we're gonna. And I feel bad because I feel like we should honor him, and I feel like bullshit just keeps getting in the way of it. And I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just honor him with my kids. I don't know. But that happens in families too. And just we constantly still have breakdowns and meltdowns too with our kids and stuff. And I just try to keep his traditions alive. And memories alive with them, especially. And it's sad because there's times for their birthday, they'll be like, oh, I blew out the candle and my birthday wish was for Papa to come back. Or my prayer was that he comes back. And it's my little one. It's my 7-year-old who just doesn't understand why God's not answering his prayer to bring him back. If he's being a good boy and he prayed and he wished, and it's just sad to have to keep explaining to him that he's not coming back. But if I could go back and talk to myself during the hard times, I would tell myself to just take it one day at a time. Don't try to rush the healing process and don't try to suppress it, because either way it's going to sneak up on you. Our last 6 years, I keep saying years, our last weeks with him were like, literally, I felt like we're slowly pulling off like the most painful Band-Aid, like it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And we knew what the end was going to be, but like you're waiting, and you're waiting and it's just getting harder. It was the most really weird situation. And not not knowing is hard too. Cause like you said, like I said, it's going to happen, the end result, but you're always trying to be hopeful. And, it's awful because he had, I think that those times where he had came to terms that he was passing, he wanted to talk about his song that he wanted to be played at his funeral, or he requested us to put a board together of his pictures, one of those photo boards that you have at your funeral. And he wanted his family on there. So we were, the night before he died, we were literally putting it together. And so he got to see it, right before. But it was just so weird because it was like basically we were planning his funeral with him being alive. And then also there were days where we couldn't talk about it because he would be upset and he wouldn't want to talk about it. So it was just a big like mixture of emotions. And there was a lot of, yeah. And there was a lot of guilt of the memories that we could have made, instead of like, we were waiting for answers for such a long time from the doctors and not knowing that those were our last weeks with him, and I wish that we would have made the best out of those last weeks, even though he was in a lot of pain and he couldn't do much. We could have done more, you know what I mean? And I try not to feel guilty about that, but there was more that we could have been there for we could have been there more, but should have, could have, would have doesn't make anything better. So, and also understanding that not everyone is going to grieve like you. Like you guys said, everybody grieves differently. Some people shut down completely. Some people have no emotion, and some people are in denial. Other people blame everyone around them. Everyone just literally grieve so differently in the way that they want to grieve. And we just have to understand that, I just have to learn to understand that it has nothing to do with me. It just has, everyone has their personal journey of grieving. So on that note, Marianne is gonna finish this long episode with a beautiful quote.
I actually don't know who this is from, and I tried to research multiple times who wrote it, but could never find anyone, so it's anonymous. Grief is the last act of love we have to give to those we love. Where there is deep grief, there was great love. Moving on doesn't mean letting go. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. If you want to catch up on our previous episodes, visit mamasmimosas.com, where you'll get access to all of our podcast show notes, our YouTube videos, and our private Facebook group, where we chat with you about each episode topic and host live Q&As with our fave mom tribe. Can't wait to see you there.